In this second translation video, we go a little further than we did in the first one. We follow the same basic format to demonstrate that there is more than one tactic to fulfill any strategy based on the context of the analytic task, but this time looking deeper into how you evaluate the possible components to identify the best tactic to pursue, using a helpful worksheet for this purpose. I begin with Analytic Task 9b and show how this was actually conducted in Trina's project, making the translation process explicit, and then demonstrate an alternative way, ending with the pros and cons of each way. So the analytic strategy we will be working on is the last part of Analytic Task 9b, which is to account for the variability in the way that discursive features, or language, functions differently in different contexts. I have 3 short clips from Trina's case illustration videos. The first about the importance of variability in discourse analysis methodology. The second about how Trina initially represented variability in ATLAS.ti using a single memo. And the third, describing how in the final ATLAS.ti project she switched to using a single variability code to use whenever they encountered a difference from the typical use of a discursive feature in the data.
Just as a little note about discourse analysis, the variability is important because language features tend to do different things in different contexts, and so it was really important for us to capture variability in how the language tended to function in these forums. We also created a variable memo which we attached to the posts that we felt didn't quite fit the pattern that was starting to emerge about how people talked about their grief. And you'll see we attached that memo to 28 different posts that we would then look at later on in the analysis. And we did have a variability code this time. You'll see in the reply codes variability, we use that instead of a memo to capture where things were different from what we anticipated or what we were seeing in the other posts.
Here is Phase 9 as it appears in Chapter 9 on page 176. We will be looking at Analytic Task 9b, but only the last bullet point or subtask of 9b, which is to account for the variability in the function of the various discursive features. I should just mention there is a typo here. It should read variability code, not variability memos. Here is an APW for Phase 9, but just documenting the translation of that last part of Analytic Task 9b, as it was actually done in the project. Again, you may want to print out the APWs from the web page to refer to during the video and later. For the unit of variability, 3 components were considered. And while memos were chosen in the first version of the ATLAS.ti project, as Trina just mentioned, codes were chosen for the later ATLAS.ti project that we're documenting here. The straightforward selected tool involves only applying discursive feature codes to reply posts and also applying the additional variability code wherever appropriate. It's telling that Analytic Task 9b was written up including the accounting for a variability as the last step of this task, rather than as a separate task. The reason the task was written up in this way is because this project was conducted by Trina and her colleague Mary Alice a couple of years before we made the 5 steps of translation explicit in our book. This retrospective APW therefore captures how Trina recollected their analytic process after they had decided what they would do, which is what we now call Step 4, the choice of components to harness from the list of possible components identified in Step 3. In this case, the choice was capturing the variability they noticed in the reply posts by simply adding an additional code called variability. This last step was therefore just included in Task B, all of which involves coding for discursive feature codes, as well as this additional code of variability. Any interpretation about the variability that they noticed was not recorded in ATLAS.ti, but postponed until the coded quotations were output when they continued work on this in Word. Here is an APW for an alternative way to fulfill task 9b. As in the first translation video, the items in blue indicate the alternative ways to fulfill the task. Now we have a separate hypothetical analytic task 9c that is just concerned with variability, the last item of the original task 9b. You may remember from Chapter 6 the importance of identifying analytic tasks at the best level of detail in terms of what is coming next, not too general and not too detailed. There's no reason in this case to lump together the first part of the original analytic task 9b, which is analyzing the reply posts for existing and emerging discursive features, with the last part to evaluate and capture variability in those posts. Separating this into two analytic tasks frees up our thinking to consider alternative ways to account for variability, which is the last part of the task, and draws attention to the fact that there are more possible ways of accounting for variability than using the same tactic that was used for the first parts of the task, which was simply applying a code whenever a discursive feature was identified. Well, this completes part 1, and in part 2 I go on to systematically consider each possible component from step 3 in order to choose the best one. And because there are several good candidates, as there typically are, I'll introduce the Translation Step 4 worksheet to illustrate the thinking process when making this choice.